Repute.
Repute.
A man of high repute.
A hotel of some repute.
Reputed.
Reputed.
She is reputed to be extremely wealthy.
The reputed leader of the Crips gang.
The painting was sold for a reputed $3 million.
Reputedly.
Reputedly.
The committee had reputedly spent over $3,000 on business entertainment.
Request.
Request.
They have made an urgent request for international aid.
Requests from customers for more information.
Anderson repeated his request that we postpone the meeting.
The study was done at the request of the chairman.
Further details will be sent on request. There were no flowers at the funeral by request.
To request more information, please call our toll-free number.
You have to request permission if you want to take any photographs.
The prosecution has requested that all charges against Hodgkins be dropped.
All club members are requested to attend the annual meeting.
The police committee requested a grant from the government to cover the extra expense.
Requiem. Requiem.
Require.
Require.
Campbell's broken leg will probably require surgery.
What's required is a complete reorganization of the system.
Most houseplants require regular watering.
You are required by law to wear a seatbelt. Regulations require that students attend at least 90% of the lectures.
The bill failed to get the required number of votes.
Requirement. Requirement.
The refugees' main requirements are food and shelter. Potatoes can provide 1/3 of our daily requirement of vitamin C. The new computer system will meet all our requirements.
The increase in gas-fired power stations means traditional coal ones are becoming surplus to requirements.
If you're installing a new bathroom, it has to meet the requirements of the building regulations.
2 measures have been introduced as legal requirements.
English 4 is a requirement for English majors.
To find out about entry requirements for students, write to the College Admissions Board. The minimum requirement for the post was a degree in engineering.
Requisite.
Requisite.
He lacks the requisite qualifications.
He lacked the moral requisites for marriage.
Requisition.
Requisition.
The building was requisitioned as a military hospital for the duration of the war.
Requite. Requite.
Re-release.
Re-release.
Reroute.
Reroute.
Rerun.
Rerun.
We watched a rerun of I Love Lucy.
The government wants to avoid a rerun of last year's crisis.
Resale.
Resale.
Reschedule.
Reschedule.
The press conference had to be rescheduled for March the 19th.
Rescind. Rescind.
Rescue.
Rescue.
Survivors of the crash were rescued by helicopter.
She died trying to rescue her children from the blaze. A daring rescue at sea.
Storms delayed the rescue of the crash victims.
Rescue workers arrived at the scene 2 hours later.
The rescue operation proved successful.
A lifeboat came to the yachtsman's rescue. Carol's brother came to the rescue and sent her $1,000.
Research.
Research.
Research into the causes of cancer.
Gould was helped in his researches by local naturalists.
It's a good idea to do some research before you buy a house.
He's been researching material for a documentary.
10 years ago, I began researching into the role of women in trade unions. This book has been very well researched.
Research and development.
Research and development.
Researcher.
Researcher. Medical researchers. Researchers have found links between stress and heart disease.
Resell.
Resell.
The retailer resells the goods at a higher price.
Resemblance.
Resemblance.
The resemblance between Susan and her sister was remarkable.
Tina bears a striking resemblance to her mother.
What happens in the film bears little resemblance to what actually happened.
Resemble.
Resemble.
It's amazing how closely Brian and Steve resemble each other.
He grew up to resemble his father.
Resent.
Resent.
I resented having to work such long hours. She bitterly resented his mother's influence over him.
Paul resented the fact that Carol didn't trust him.
Resentful.
Resentful.
She felt resentful at not being promoted.
Resentment.
Resentment.
She was filled with deep resentment at being passed over for promotion. He felt considerable resentment towards Sheila for making him work late.
Reservation.
Reservation.
A dinner reservation.
Customers are advised to make seat reservations well in advance.
I had serious reservations about his appointment as captain.
We condemn their actions without reservation.
A Navajo reservation. A wildlife reservation.
Reserve.
Reserve.
I'd like to reserve a table for two.
Do you have to reserve tickets in advance?
A separate room is reserved for smokers.
Reserved parking spaces.
Reserve a little of the mixture to sprinkle over the top of the pie.
She spoke in a tone of voice she usually reserved for dealing with officials.
The management reserves the right to refuse admission. $10 million in cash reserves.
Oil reserves.
Somehow, Debbie maintained an inner reserve of strength.
We always keep some money in reserve, just in case.
She overcame her own natural reserve. She overcame her own natural reserve.
A wildlife reserve.
Reserved. Reserved.
Ellen was a shy, reserved girl.
Reservist.
Reservist.
Reservoir.
Reservoir.
She found she had reservoirs of unexpected strength.
Reset.
Reset.
Resettle.
Resettle.
The tribesmen were forcibly resettled by the government.
The area was resettled in the latter half of the century.
Reshuffle.
A cabinet reshuffle.
Reside.
Reside.
He spent most of his time in Rutherglen, where his family resided.
Joe's talent resides in his storytelling abilities.
Executive power resides in the president.
Residence.
Residence.
The ambassador's official residence.
A residence permit.
Jeff has a permanent residence in Canada, but is still a U.S. citizen.
Rome was his main place of residence.
He took up residence in Chicago. The emperor was in residence at his summer palace.
Residence hall.
Residence hall.
Residency.
Residency.
Resident.
Resident.
The residence of Westville.
Many retired British people are now resident in Spain. A resident tutor.
The resident population of mental hospitals has fallen by 20%.
He's our resident expert on computer games.
Residential.
Residential.
A quiet residential neighborhood.
telephone services for residential customers.
Resident.
Residential. Residential care.
Residential care.
Residential home.
Residential home.
Residential treatment facility.
Residential treatment facility.
Resident physician.
Resident physician.
Residents association.
Residents association.
Residual.
Residual.
The residual effects of drug treatment.
Residuals.
Residuals.
Residuary.
Residuary.
Residue.
Residue.
Residue from sewage treatment plants.
The flies leave a sticky residue on crops. Rinse off any soap residue.
The residue of the stock was sold.
Resign.
Resign.
She resigned from the government last week.
He resigned as governor of Punjab in August.
Tom has since resigned his membership at the golf club.
Josh resigned himself to the long walk home.
At 16, I resigned myself to the fact that I'd never be a dancer. Resignation.
Resignation.
Illness forced his resignation. Further resignations are expected later this week.
She gave a sigh of resignation.
He accepted her decision with resignation.
Resigned.
Resigned.
She's resigned to spending Christmas on her own.
Sam was resigned to the fact that he would never be promoted.
We'll have to leave, she said with a resigned sigh.
Resilience.
Resilience.
The resilience of youth.
People showed remarkable resilience during the war.
Resilient.
Resilient.
Children are often very resilient.
The company proved remarkably resilient during the recession.
Boots with tough, resilient soles.
Any chemical treatment will leave hair less resilient than before.
Resin.
Resin.
Resist.
Resist.
I just can't resist chocolate.
She can never resist buying new shoes. It's hard to resist an invitation like that.
They only wanted $3 for it, so how could I resist?
He resisted pressure to resign.
For months, the company has resisted changing its account system.
The proposal was strongly resisted by the police.
Demonstrators violently resisted attempts to remove them from the building. He was charged with trying to resist arrest.
Your ability to resist infection.
Resistance.
Resistance.
People's resistance to change.
The no smoking policy was introduced with little resistance from staff. Rebel gunmen have put up strong resistance.
The body's resistance to infection. Disease resistance.
Many people don't make changes because they're following the path of least resistance.
Kirk always just takes the line of least resistance.
Resistant.
Resistant.
An infection that's resistant to antibiotics.
Shock-resistant rubber.
Many managers are resistant to change.
Resistor.
Resistor.
Resit.
Resit.
Reskilling.
Reskilling.
Resolute.
Resolute.
Resolute opposition.
Resolute leadership. Resolute leadership.
She remained resolute in her belief that the situation would improve.
Mia resolutely refused to talk about her illness.
Resolution.
Resolution.
The resolution was passed by a 2/3 majority.
A resolution calling for a ban on dumping nuclear waste.
They have failed to comply with the resolution.
A forum for the resolution of commercial disputes.
Carol made a resolution to work harder at school.
Then, with sudden resolution, she stood up.
Resolve.
Resolve.
The crisis was resolved by negotiations. Barnet was desperate for money to resolve his financial problems.
After the divorce, she resolved never to marry again.
Mary resolved that she would stop smoking.
The Senate resolved to accept the President's proposals.
DNA samples were extracted and resolved.
This mixture will resolve into two separate compounds.
The argument resolved itself into an uneasy truce.
Recent events strengthened her resolve to find out the truth.
Resonance. Resonance.
A tradition that has little resonance in the 21st century.
His words will have resonance for many musicians.
Resonant.
Resonant.
The violin's smooth, resonant tone.
Prince resonant with traditions of Russian folk art.
Resonate.
An idea that resonates with many voters. The music resonated through the streets.
Literature that resonates with biblical imagery.
A hall resonating with laughter.
Resonator. Resonator.
Resound.
Resort.
Resort.
Aspen, a ski resort in Colorado.
Lagoon Reef is one of the best resort hotels. Drug treatment should only be used as a last resort.
A weapon of last resort.
Economic sanctions will be used only in the last resort.
In the past, your family was the first resort when looking for a job.
We hope they will be able to resolve the situation without resort to force.
Officials fear that extremists may resort to violence.
Vets have had to resort to killing the animals.
Resound.
Resound.
The stadium resounded with cheers.
By now, the whole room was resounding to the sound of the team's chants.
A horn resounding through the forest.
The war still resounds in the country's folklore.
Resounding.
Resounding.
The show was a resounding success. A resounding thud.
Resource.
Resource.
Canada's vast mineral resources.
A country rich in natural resources.
She had no financial resources.
Only limited resources are available to the police.
He proved that he has considerable inner resources.
Resources for learning.
A valuable new computer resource.
A man of great resource.
The program wasn't adequately resourced.
Resourceful.
Resourceful.
A woman who is energetic and resourceful.
Respawn. Respawn.
Respect.
Respect. I have the greatest respect for Jane's work.
Out of respect for the wishes of her family, the affair was not reported in the media. The boys showed a complete lack of respect for authority.
Your mother should be treated with respect.
With respect, I think you're wrong.
My fear turned into a respect for the sea.
People should have a healthy respect for alcohol.
In many respects, the new version is not as good as the old one.
Mum is very stubborn, and Kim takes after her in that respect. Give my respects to your wife.
I've come to pay my respects to Mrs. O'Hara. This is especially true in respect of the UK.
The freedom of a property owner to make a contract with respect to his property.
With respect to your request, I am not yet able to agree.
She respected him for his honesty.
I respect his views, although I do not agree with them.
She said she wanted to leave, and her father respected her wishes.
I would like you to respect my privacy.
The need to respect human rights.
The President is expected to respect the Constitution.
Respectable.
Respectable.
Hard-working, respectable people. A respectable family.
Put a tie on, it'll make you look more respectable.
A respectable income.
Her exam results were respectable enough.
Respected.
Respected.
He's one of the most respected managers in the game.
A highly respected journalist.
Respecter.
Respecter.
Disease is no respecter of persons.
She is a respecter of the rights of all religious groups.
Respectful.
Respectful.
They listened in respectful silence. He was always respectful of my independence.
Respecting.
Respecting.
A discussion took place respecting the provision of science teaching.
Respective.
Respective.
We all went back to our respective homes to wait for news.
The respective roles of teachers and students.
Respectively.
Respectively.
The cups and saucers cost £5 and £3 respectively.
Respiration.
Respiration.
Respirator.
Respirator.
The baby was immediately put on a respirator.
Respiratory.
Respiratory.
Respiratory disease.
Respire.
Respire.
Respite.
Respite.
The trip was a welcome respite from the pressures of work.
A brief respite from persecution.
The pain went on without respite.
We have a few days' respite before we have to pay them.
Respite care.
Respite care.
Resplendent.
Resplendent.
She looked resplendent in a silk dress.
Respond.
Respond.
Responding to the news, Mr. Watt appealed for calm.
The U.S. responded by sending troops into Laos.
Villagers responded with offers of help.
He responded that he didn't want to see anyone.
Dave didn't respond to any of her emails.
She has responded well to treatment.
Colds do not respond to antibiotics.
Respondent. Respondent.
Only 62% of respondents said they were satisfied.
Response.
Response.
The public's response to our appeal for help.
The law was passed in response to public pressure.
The exhibition has received a positive response from visitors.
The decision provoked an angry response from residents. His immediate response was one of disbelief.
Emmett's new exhibition has met with a favourable response from critics.
Sure, why not? Was his response to all of Billy's suggestions.
Carl made no response and carried on with his meal.
I am writing in response to your letter of June the 12th.
Ronnie merely groaned in response.
Responsibility.
Responsibility.
Kelly's promotion means more money and more responsibility.
The minister has responsibility for the National Health Service.
A manager with responsibility for over 100 staff. It's your responsibility to inform us of any changes.
The firm is denying all responsibility. No one wants to take responsibility for the problem. The surgeon accepted full responsibility for the error that led to her death. So far, no one has claimed responsibility for the bombings.
My responsibilities include answering the phone and dealing with customer inquiries.
A single parent struggling to balance work and family responsibilities.
We all have responsibility to protect the environment.
Parents need to encourage a sense of responsibility in their children.
The company saw it as part of its social responsibility to provide education for its workers. A doctor's first responsibility is to her patients.
Responsible.
Responsible.
Police believe that the same man is responsible for 3 other murders in the area. If anything goes wrong, I will hold you personally responsible.
We are determined to bring the people responsible to justice.
Mills is responsible for a budget of over $5 million.
The airline is legally responsible for the safety of its passengers.
He is responsible for recruiting and training new staff.
The floods were responsible for over 100 deaths.
You can leave the children with Billy. He's very responsible.
It's time you started acting like a responsible adult.
Cabinet members are directly responsible to the President.